1935, the Lions win the NFL championship. The Detroit Tigers take the World Series. The Red Wings bring home Lord Stanley's Cup. Joe Louis begins his rise to world domination. This transforms the Motor City into Detroit, City of Champions.
Game on, Detroit City of Champions podcast. This is episode 1. I'm Jamie Flanagan.
Charles Avison.
Charles, you wrote a trilogy of books. You started out with one, Detroit City of Champions, and then you continued on with the players and more of the players. So there's a whole trilogy that covers this year, this magnificent year in Detroit sports, 1935, what led up to it, the ripple effect afterwards, but really 1935 is the crux of what's going on in these books. Why is 1935, and we're going to dive into this in this podcast, all the players, all the people, but what is so important about 1935?
Well, you actually left out one thing, and the thing about it is, you left out one thing that I wrote, and it's really the beginning of the story, as far as my story and why I guess you can see maybe why I feel how important it is, and it's when I was a senior at Western in 2005. And I just come back from the University of Edinburgh, Scotland. Research history was like my main thing. That's what I've always loved to do. Write history, read history, and it was my senior year at Western. And a couple friends of mine were just hanging out in my apartment, drinking beer, hanging out, and that. And one of my friends had an old Detroit Tiger media guide, and we were just going through random facts and figures, like some sports nerds, I guess you could say. And we came across the fact that it said that the Tigers, Lions, and Red Wings had all won their championships in the same season, and I'd never heard that fact. I was a diehard Detroit sports fan, and I just never heard of that fact. And in fact, I didn't even really know. That's why we were looking up, because I didn't even know what year the Tigers had even won their first championship. I thought maybe the Ty Cobb years did. Ty Cobb did at some point, and I didn't know at that point. And so anyways, so when my friend read this fact that it said that the three teams that all won their championships in the same year, I thought it was pretty, kind of a cool fact. And I was actually taking a sports history class at that moment. Oh, okay. And so I had a 2-page paper due. So this is what I'm kind of getting at here is I had to work on this 2-page paper, and I figured make this the subject of this paper. And I could not find enough information to fill a 2-page paper.
Really?
Yes. I mean, I could confirm the fact that the three teams had all done it. In fact, what I found, in the initial exploration of this is that there wasn't just that the three teams had in fact won, but it wasn't just 3 random championships. It was the first for each team.
Man.
So that fact, I was like, that's the easiest trivia question that I've ever heard of. I can't believe, what year did each team win their first championship? What year did the Tigers win their first World Series? What year did the Lions win their first NFL championship? The Red Wings their first Stanley Cup. It's the same season, 1935. The Red Wings carries a little bit into 36. But it was that 1935 season. It's the easiest trivia question that, everybody in Detroit should know. And I had never heard of this.
No.
And so I ended up making it my thesis to graduate from Western, and it had to be like a 30-page paper. And I was worried because of the lack of information, how I was even going to do this 30-page paper. But when I went to the original newspapers from 1935, I had no more concerns, because what I found when I went to those original newspapers this is the biggest story that nobody has ever heard of. I mean, in fact, there was so much information. You have the rise of Joe Louis. You have 33 championships. You have a testimonial dinner at the end of the year where the governor of Michigan, City Council of Detroit, declared the day of the dinner Champions Day. As you mentioned, the ripple effect that runs from that time till now, that it created the notion that Detroit was a sports town. And so it was just in fact, the 30 pages I had to work on was much too small, and that's what led me to I had to actually summarize it to get it into 30 pages. And then so after I graduated college, I just maintained my interest in it, and I just kept doing my own little exploratory research in the libraries. And the more that I looked, the more that I found, so I ended up writing my first book. I wrote the first book on the subject. It focuses on the season itself. I call it, the title of the book is Detroit City of Champions, the story of the most important season in Detroit sports history. And then no sooner had I finished with the first book that, even just along the way of doing the first book, I realized, you've got so many teams. Really the big thing that I came across was that, is that as much as the season was forgotten, so were the players. And we have some of the greatest personalities, some of the greatest players in Detroit sports history were on these teams.
In sports history, period.
In sports history, period. But in the like the folklore of Detroit, especially in this time, these people, these athletes were like, I mean, they were less than gods, but they were more than men back in that time. They were incredible, and so they were just like the fascination. In fact, if you go on eBay and that, you'll find, like, if you look up 1935 Detroit, you find like old scrapbooks that are just loaded with every clipping of every game. I've just seen like these people. I mean, it was just absolutely huge in that time, and so that was the thing. So I wanted to bring I wanted to bring the players that had made the story to the forefront, and that's what really the first book was. The first book is a little over a year of writing, but in addition to the 3 months for the original thesis, which is what it was built on. But the second two books were 6 years.
Wow!
And so because there were so many players, and the information on the players is so tough to find. I mean, I was finding old matchbooks trying and using those as reference points, and an old game some game programs were like $700 to acquire a game program just to get the information on a player. I'd like buy the game program for $700 and then resell it on eBay. I'd just be getting it just for the information.
Oh my God.
Some people are using it for a collector's item. I was getting it just to get the information about these players because there was such a lack of information.
We got to put that in your back pocket. We got to take notes that when you get to one of these players that you had to harvest that information.
Oh, you'll see
in
it
an extraordinary way.
You'll see
you
it. You
got to point those out because we're going to dive into
to
all of it. I want to hear about. All of it. I was remiss because I love that. I love that backstory because my question usually is, tell me about your childhood, that's awesome. That it was a 2-page paper that has spawned this. We met at because you work it hard. You go out and you're selling this at street fairs and just wherever you can get the word out about the book. And we met at a street fair.
Sure.
And I was just if anybody knows me, I know nothing about sports, but I love Detroit. I love history. I love the city, and I love how excited people. I'm not a sports guy at all. I never really played much. I ran track. That's my extent of sports. Sure. But I love going to games, right? And it's just a thing about being in Detroit and going into one of the arenas or the stadium, and just that feeling. And I've been in other cities, and it's a different vibe. It definitely, our opening day is like almost like you would think it's a national holiday.
Yeah, sure.
Just for the Tigers and their opening day, it's Detroit is just passionate about it, and you really think it springs from this 1935 year.
Absolutely. And I talk a lot about it in the books. The idea being, one of the things that is to look at the timing of when it took place, 1935. Detroit was in the middle of the Great Depression. Yeah. Statistically speaking, Detroit was the hardest hit city in the country. Detroit was going through hell at that moment. I mean, they'd been through hell. Maybe they're a little bit, coming back a little bit. But the other thing, besides just the economic misery behind it, you're dealing the teams themselves. It's a completely different sports landscape in the middle of the 1930s. And really, that's kind of where the story begins because for the Tigers were terrible prior to 1934. The Tigers really came out of nowhere in 1934.
We know what that's like.
But the Tigers were prior to 1934. The Tigers were absolutely dreadful. They were terrible. They finished in 5th place. 5 consecutive years. They were terrible.
Right. Out of 6 teams.
No, there was. Right there. I think it was 8. What was it? 8 or 10 teams.
Okay, yeah,
but they were.
Middle of the pack at best.
They called them second division. They were called the second division team. And so, anyways, they. So the Tigers at the end of 1933. There's a guy named a newspaper reporter called Iffy the Dopester, and so Iffy it's crazy
Iffy
because
Dopester.
It's crazy because it's weird because somebody has written on the name of Iffy I've seen when I was growing up I saw a couple Iffy the Dopester articles and I can't remember if it was a modern day person who had taken their name but it was. I
want to start a band called that.
His real name was Malcolm Bingay, and he'd worked for the Detroit. I believe he worked for the Detroiters and the Free Press. But anyways,
Iffy the Dopester.
So at the end of 1933, the Tigers were absolutely dreadful. The players were either too young or they were too old. And the owner of the Tigers, Frank Navin, his health was absolutely terrible. It was so bad that that there was people, like all of his closest friends and advisors were telling him, "You've got to sell the team. You've got to sell the team. You're just for your own health because it's killing you." But anyways, the sports landscape in 1935, I guess, is what I'm trying to hone in on. So the Tigers were absolutely dreadful. Their attendance at the end of 1933 was the worst it had been since 1907.
Oh,
it was. I mean, in the middle of the Great Depression, people got way better things to do than go spend what little money they have on watching a team that reminds them on a daily basis of their current sad sack situation. And so that the attendance was horrendous. Again, there was no really excitement with the Tigers team. And then the Lions didn't exist. There was no Detroit Lions. The NFL tried 3 times prior to 1934-35 to bring an NFL team in the city, and they had failed 3 times. And so of course Detroit was an attractive destination for an NFL team, but without any, in the middle of the Great Depression, I mean they had failed 3 times in the Roaring '20s, and so there was no chance to bring an NFL team in the middle of the Great Depression. I mean, maybe a 4th chance to bring a team might be possible, but not till after the Great Depression was over and people had money. And then so the Detroit Red Wings, they changed their name 3 times in 5 years. I mean, this was the 3rd name of the team, and so the fans that came to watch the Red Wings, the fans that came to watch the team, the coaches and the Red Wings owners at the time like almost depressed because what little Detroit was not a hockey town at that time.
Yeah.
In fact, the main bulk of their attendance was Canadian fans coming from Windsor. So it created this strange appearance at the games where when the Red Wings were losing, the fans were excited. And when the fans, you see what I'm saying? Like the awkwardness of so whenever the Red Wings score a goal, everybody's all mad. That's not sustainable for
players down on the ice are like, do people not know how this works?
Exactly.
You're supposed to cheer for us.
Yeah, exactly. So the Red Wing, they're like, well, we're barely surviving, so they can't throw the Canadian, no, we want only Detroit fans because it created this really strange scenario.
Where was the league at that point? Because you hear so much about the original 6.
Great question. Yeah. Well, at that time there was 8.
Okay, so it had been up. It was up to 8 at that point.
Yeah, I mean it fluctuated a little bit.
Sure.
Like in 1933, I forget because you had Ottawa. Ottawa was, I think there might have been 9 in 1933, but in 35, 36 there was 8 because there was a lot of fluctuation within those couple of years. So that's one of the things. The original 6 refers to the idea that the Great Depression knocked off 2 more teams off of those 8, and so when the Great Depression was over, there was only 6 left. And that's why they say the original 6, because the original 6 actually refers to the 1950s era where there was only 6 teams left.
Okay.
So it's kind of a misnomer because people say the original 6 are those were the first 6 teams ever in NHL history. There was way more teams before the original 6, way more. I mean, there was at one point I think the league was up to 10 or 12 teams. There was a lot of teams. Changing their names and everything like this. So
well, that's when you said that the Wings had changed their names 3 times, and I'm like, well, they're the original 6, and this is already 1935.
Yeah.
What how does that original 6 come into play?
Yeah.
So I'm sure when we do, because we'll do an episode just on the Wings,
there's some fantastic. So the Red Wings have some of my favorite stories. They're such a great.
We'll
story.
dive into that.
Yep.
So there's the landscape for it.
So it's dreadful. That's what I'm saying. So it's a horrible. So it's not just a rough economic time, but just to summarize. Tigers are dreadful. Lions don't exist. Red Wings have changed their name 3 times in 5 years. And the joke around town at that point was that Jack Adams, who was the coach and general manager of the team, was exchanging potatoes for tickets. That was the joke around town because nobody cared. They're like, no, I don't even want to give you a potato for a ticket. They didn't even that was the sports landscape. The Detroit before 1934-35 was the farthest thing from a sports town. There's one other thing too, Garwood, which I really can't wait till we get to Garwood. The speedboat racer, and Detroit was also the home of Garwood, and the speedboat racing was becoming supreme in Detroit at that point. So that really of all the sports, speedboat race. If you were talking about sports in the 1930s, speedboat racing was king.
That was our point of pride, and that was it, right?
Yeah, baseball and all that. They were. Of course, they were Tiger fans. But usually at that time it was really the Tigers were a Detroit team. Whereas now Detroit, the Tigers Detroit, like everybody from Michigan identifies with the Tigers. Everybody from Michigan comes. There's like entire Michigan broadcasting networks. But at that time, Detroit was like really like the Tigers were like Detroit's team. And so it didn't have that radial draw like that. I mean, I'm not saying there wasn't people from Michigan, but it wasn't like it is today. That's for sure. And so that's what I mean. Like, so really, if you were to go back to 1930s and look at Detroit as a sports landscape, the primary thing that you would hear, the interest would be speedboat racing, and that's what I'm saying. Like this season, as we'll get into, is really the fulcrum. It's really the turning point for Detroit in 1 year. I mean, I even have quotes in 1936 after it was all done. And they actually say in there, this was the birth of our – they say Detroit is the capital of the sports world. And they even say if you were to go back prior to this season, they're like nobody cared. And then they say like I have quotes from these writers at that time saying the last 12 months have made everyone here a sports fan, everyone. And so it really was this in the middle of the Depression when you have – all this, there was nothing really to get excited about. Detroit was the motor city, but the auto industry was in the toilet. This is years before, before Motown and music and all the things. So their main identity was in the toilet. And now they have a new identity as far as one of the great sports sounds in the country after having done something so incredible.
But it was pretty dismal. So what was the turning point? Was it did the Tigers kind of take the lead on that? With what was the turning point? How did things begin to shift?
So that's in the very first book I have a quote where it was so cool to see this article that I found. And really everything in my book is all based off of original articles. Like what I try to do with these is my goal of these was to let the people of the 1930s tell the story, and I just kind of acted as a narrator. I tried to I use a ton of like newspaper clippings, and basically I just stitched them together. Like I said, okay, here's the situation. I got to give like a little backstory, and then I just as much as possible turn it over to them to tell the story because I wasn't there. I had no idea. And so when you let them tell the story, you just really dive in and see like the flavor of everything. You see like what they were thinking and what they were in the article. That I'm thinking about now, it was called. His name was Harry LeDuc, and I have to double check what newspaper. I think it was the Detroit News, but he said the article he said it's what's in the heart, in the mind, and in the mob. I believe is the name of the article. It's right off one of the first articles I cite in the first book.
Oh, you got me. All right.
Yeah, and in the mob meaning like the group.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So nothing untoward.
All right. But I was excited for you.
Yeah. No,
but I'm still excited.
But anyways, but the idea is again. And this is what's interesting, and this is one of the reasons why, like, really, one of the things the elements that piqued my interest was the possibility that he actually approached it almost as like a study. Like, excuse me, he looked at it and he said, he said, is there something in the water of Detroit that has made us like so great? What has made us win like this? I mean, is there something in the water? Is there something that we feed the players that's made them all champions? Because again, it wasn't just the three teams. You had the Tigers, Lions, Red Wings, but you also have the rise of Joe Louis, which is, as we'll see, was like that was the signature event of the country in 1935, not just Detroit. And so you have a total of 33 championships. I mean, every sport. This newspaper we've got right here. This is a replica of a Detroit Free Press that shows at a glance just how great this season was. This only has 21 of the 33 champions on it, and so this is what they're looking at. Understand what is it that made this city win. And this is what he explored. The concept that he got at, and I fully agree with this theory, I guess you could call it, is the idea that. Is that once the team started, Detroit needed something to get excited about at this time. Yeah. They were just looking for something excited to do. And so when these teams started even playing remotely well, the fans they started going to games and having fun. And so anybody that's ever played sports can tell you, like, there's a whole different, especially if you're ever watching a game, like when a team's winning and but when a team is winning, okay, is winning and the city is excited and they're going to like every game. There's a whole different – it's a huge difference because like the fans are engaged with every little thing that a player does. Like if he pulls his back pocket out because it's like a good luck thing.
Yeah.
Like every time he goes to the batter's box, they're like, oh, he pulls his pocket out. They're engaged. Like every time he like does a certain smirk on his face towards a different direction, like they're like, oh my God, he just did that because like this, like, or like every single like if he's like they're engaged with like the battles between the pitcher and the hitter, like they're they're just engaged with everything that's going on. They can see every nuance. They're like the players that are up there. They're tuned in with the crowd. You see what I'm saying? It's a whole different. It's you see what I'm saying? Like the crowd is there to support them rather than so. And he actually says his exact words were, he says in Detroit we say go out there and give them all you got. Kid, we're with you. And instead of there's a whole different mentality saying. We just paid you a bunch of money. Now go out there, and if you don't win or if you don't produce, we're gonna boo you. There's a whole different thing. It's a whole different mentality when they're like, we're just behind you, and that was like this. That was like the sort of that was what they tapped into was like, we are with you. They're like the expectations were, especially in 1934, which is the primary year for all this. They were just with them. They weren't like there was really the expectations. Like again, especially in 1934. Were just non-existent because of how bad they had all been, and so it was like, go out there and get you, kid. We're with you, and so that's what I'm saying. So like when the crowd, that's what he was talking about, be in the mind, the mob, was that when the fans are, like the entire fan base is with you, that's it creates that extra. I think nowadays they call it like the 12th man, in stadiums because there's in a football stadium there's 11 men on a team and then the 12th man is the crowd, so they'll call themselves like the 12th man. So it's that sort of concept, which is that that the fans, when people are behind you like that, it elevates you. It's almost. I mean, in a way, it's almost like a magic. It's almost like a magic. It can. I think that it can elevate a person or a team's level of play, and I agree. I think from everything I've read, I think that really was what led to this domino effect, where once these teams started winning, they just it was just like something that. It actually, as they got deeper into these seasons, there actually started to become more pressure. Like on the Red Wings now, like they had to win. Like the whole city was finally turning out for them to watch their games. They wanted to see this final piece of the City of Champions puzzle, and like so for them, like there was pressure on them. But I think that again, for a team that was playing in front of sparse crowds, all of a sudden now every single night's a sellout at Olympia Stadium with 14,000 fans a game. They just they're like, man, the fans are with us. They're really excited, and I think that's what elevated. That's what I think.
So in the boating and Garwood, right? Mm-hmm. So people were really positive about him because he was just unstoppable. People were excited about that, and then it turns to the Tigers. So were the Tigers the first one on an upswing? Because you said the Lions didn't.
Now we're getting into the story, and so it really bears. I was actually going to go for a second. I was going to go into it. We were talking about the 30s in general, the sports landscape.
Yeah,
but more specifically,
do we need more background on the 30s?
I think we're good. Because the Tigers is really where it all begins. The Tigers is really where it all begins.
Okay.
So at the end of 1933, I mentioned Iffy the Dopester because there was a thing called the Iffy had called it the Riot Act. There was an article that said Iffy issues the Riot Act because Iffy just had this huge article where he was just pure anger towards just about the Tigers. He was he's like, we have no money, yet the people that, the diehards still come to the games, and the product we have is dreadful. He was just like, he's like, either do something. He was actually like telling, the owner, like, do something or get rid of the team to somebody that can. Because, it was all, he was so, the article was like so angry about it. And so Frank Navin, again, I mentioned Frank Navin, the owner of the Tigers. The thing that differentiated Frank Navin was one of the most well-respected executives in the history of baseball. A lot of times, modern fans might know him because every time Ty Cobb would he was always in battles with Ty Cobb over his contract disputes. There was a ton of contract disputes with Ty Cobb. And so that's really, I think, a lot of times that people most of the time when they hear Frank Navin's name is he was like the miser of an owner that never paid Ty Cobb or always kind of. Was always tightwad with Ty Cobb. That's kind of how he's been portrayed. But in his day, Frank Navin was he was one of the most respected owners in the game. Oh. And he was if it wasn't for Frank Navin, I can confidently say that we would not have, at least not in the form that we have the Tigers now. Navin was the Tigers in the early 1900s. I mean, he started off as a bookkeeper for the original owner.
Wow.
The he won like this little power struggle with Ed Barrow, who Ed Barrow became the GM, one of the greatest general managers in baseball history. He rebuilt the Yankees, the 1930s dynasty Yankees. So I mean, there's up in the air whether we should have kept Ed Barrow, but in either case, Navin, so that he won the controlling interest of the team from the original owner, and from two successive owners, and then Navin, unlike all the other owners in baseball, all the other owners were businessmen who bought into Major League Baseball as a hobby. Well, Navin, the baseball was his primary business.
Right.
He evolved as a baseball owner, and so if he didn't turn a profit off the team, then he was not. Then there was no. He has no money.
Yeah.
Even private money. He doesn't even have money to pay his bills for his house. So
yeah, because most sports owners today are millionaires in other respects, and these are their toys.
Exactly. the teams are they're sportsmen, so they're doing it for fun. Well, Navin, I mean, he was doing it for fun. He did it he loved the Tigers, and so but the Tigers' survival was dependent on turning a profit on them and able to reinvest in the ballpark, and reinvest in the team and everything like this.
What stadium were they? Where were they playing at the time?
Well, the original ballpark was Bennett Field. Bennett Field, and then it became Navin Field. They named it when they made it, I believe it was 1918 when it became Navin Field. It was it was Bennett all the way up till I believe it was 1918. But anyways, so when he was building the Navin Field, he was asking other people what should I name it, and they were all unanimous. They're like, Frank, you built this park. I mean, he was able to turn the money that he had made off the Tigers, and turn that into the money to build this new ballpark, which so they were like, you got to give it your name. I mean, this is Navin Field, and so they all basically convinced him to turn. So long and short of it is, So going in, so the Tigers were Navin's baby, okay. At the end of 1933, he wasn't ignorant of the situation. He knew that
it was abysmal at the end of 33.
It was terrible. It
Right.
was absolutely terrible. I mean, the finances were terrible. He had no money. He'd taken on the business partner, Walter Briggs. And that which ended up becoming the name Briggs Stadium is people will know the Tiger Stadium as Briggs Stadium, so he took on Walter Briggs as a partner just to help him defray a lot of the costs and infuse some capital in it.
Yeah.
Because Navin actually lost most of his fortune during the stock market crash because he'd been investing in some other stuff, with some of his team money into the stock market, and he got completely cleaned out. And so not only is the team horrible, but Navin himself is basically bankrupt. He has got no money.
Okay.
The Tigers have no money. It's just a terrible situation. And the team the dominant team at this time is the New York Yankees. Lou Gehrig, Babe Ruth, Tony Lazzeri, Bill Dickey. I mean, this is Lefty Gomez. It's the 1930s Yankees are one of the most dominant teams in the history of baseball. I mean, and that's what they're in there. They got their team is they got a couple maybe guys, but they're too young or too old, and they're terrible. So. And Navin has a heart attack, and so it was I forget, it was the second or third one he'd had. His health was terrible, and so all the doctors all tell him, you got to sell this team because it's killing you. First of all, if you sell the team, you're going to get some money, so you should have some money for yourself, and you can retire and take it easy. And they're not going anywhere, and the stress is killing you. So that's what that's where he's at this moment at the end of 1933. And so this is I think one of my favorite parts of the entire story. Of what happens next is that he doesn't sell. He doesn't sell. In fact,
I love that.
He borrows money. He mortgages virtually everything he has to go in. And I believe he borrows money from his business partner, $100,000 in the Great Depression, which is an insane amount of money.
We got to math that out.
Yeah, we got to do some kind of
All right, 100,000 in 1934.
Yeah.
All right, keep going.
1930. 1930. Yeah, and then 1933. So 34. And I really am curious to see the spending power because it's just apples are going for a penny or something. So. Anyways, so he mortgages $100,000 and he goes out and he buys because the Philadelphia Athletics at that moment are the hardest hit. They're also in a terrible financial situation. So he goes out and he buys Mickey Cochran, the A's, one of the greatest, if not the greatest catcher in baseball at that time. and a famous winner. Baseball history regards Mickey Cochran is like second behind only Ty Cobb as like the winningest player. Just a fiercely intense player when it came to winning. And so he brought in Mickey Cochran as his catcher and manager to be a catcher manager for the Tigers. And so everybody's looking at Navin going, "What are you doing? Frank, one guy's not going to make a difference. You just you mortgaged everything."
Yeah, $1.9 million, $100,000 in 1934.
Okay,
Today,
but I don't know if that's representative of it,
million.
because I know that's the exchange rate, but the inflation rate.
But
the
still,
spending power at the time.
Oh yeah.
That's what I mean. Like the spending power of 100, like the
and this was the middle of the Depression.
Exactly.
This was like the middle of the Depression.
Yes.
$100,000 in the middle of the Depression.
It was the kind of thing. It was like a headliner move. Like it was the biggest move in baseball. Like one of the biggest, because one of just the biggest moves. And the Tiger fans, it was huge. Like the owner just went and brought the best catcher in baseball to Detroit. And so there was a glimmer of like excitement from this.
Okay.
So they're like,
so that was kind of the turning point.
Made a move. Uncle Frank made a move and brought in this great, Mickey Cochran. Mickey Cochran won 2 World Series and they went to a third. So he was 3 pennant winners. So he'd done head-to-head battle with the Yankees, beating them, and in the process ended up winning 2 World Series and only getting beat out on the third one. 3 American League pennants. So he was like one of the greatest, winningest players in baseball, and he was the heartbeat of that Philadelphia A's team, which was an incredible team. So, anyways, so it is, So I gotta say this, but the excitement only grew from there.
Yeah.
In the 1934 spring training, when Mickey Cochran gets there, and this right here is I think this is like just the greatest story. They ask, they go to spring training, all the reporters, as they normally do, they go to spring training and they give them the fairly bland question, "Hey, Mickey, how you think the Tigers are going to do this year?" And the normal sports answer is to go, "Oh yeah, we're really going to try hard. We're going to do the best we can." Like this. That's not Mickey Cochran.
Did
Mickey
he point
Cochran,
to center field?
No, in a matter of speaking, yes, he did. He said, "We're going to the World Series this year.
I love it.
We're going to the World Series. We're winning the pennant." And they look at him and they're like, "Mickey, we can't print this."
Mickey, you're in Detroit.
Yeah, he's like, "We can't print this." And what he tells them is this. It's like a famous line. This is supported by 3 different quotes and his own behavior, what follows. And because Mickey says, "You know what your problem is?" He checks these guys. He says, "You know what your problem?" He goes, "When I was with the A's, we used to look forward to playing you." He's like, "You guys," your problem is you don't know how to win. And you win by coming out and by believing it starts with believing you're going to, expecting you are, demanding it. That's where it all starts. You don't win by just like hoping you do. You do it by demanding it in doing, if you have to crawl through glass to win, you do it. And that was Mickey Cochran, and that's what he brought to this team. And so Mickey comes in, and every single player in this, if you look through this Tiger section, I'm telling you, I think I've got a quote for every single Detroit Tiger player in there, and they all tell him, or they all give Mickey Cochran the credit for everything that happened next.
Wow.
Because what happens next is Mickey comes into spring training, and he comes in and he brings the pitchers aside, and he's got these young group of pitchers. He's got a few veterans in that too, and he's like, but the biggest star, but most of them are like the ones that had playing the biggest part were a lot of these young guys: Schoolboy Rowe, Eldon Ocker, Tommy Bridges, and he tells these guys, he's watching them pitching that, and he tells them, "You are the greatest pitchers I've ever seen. You're the greatest pitchers I've ever seen." And like these guys in there, especially Eldon Ocker has a great quote, and he says, as a young guy looking up to Mickey Cochran, who'd won 2 World Series and just this incredible Hall of Fame career, and this is a guy that caught Lefty Grove, who's one of the best pitchers in baseball history. And that at that time was huge. And so he's like, to have this incredible manager tell us and really say it with the conviction that that we're the greatest that he's ever seen and ever seen, that we're going to be the greatest pitchers that he'd ever seen. He goes, it really infused us with this sense that we were the greatest and that we were just on our way to becoming that. Were they really that strong, or was that just good motivation? Well, that's the thing, is that he saw something in them, you know, and he did, and he was able to pull the right strings. Like it's one of the great things about Mickey is that as the story, you know, goes in, we talk about these other players, for instance, Schoolboy Rowe, who became like the sensation. Schoolboy Rowe is the sensation of baseball, not just the Tigers.
I love the names.
Yeah, Schoolboy Rowe. So anyways, so you have Schoolboy Rowe in this whole Schoolboy Rowe. Mickey was a psychologist. He was a catcher, but he was like a psychologist. He knew how to get the most out of all these pitchers and how to get them to pitch the best. And so, for instance, Schoolboy Rowe, he was totally easy on Schoolboy. Like, oh, Schoolboy, is everything okay? You know, can I get you? Don't worry about that last one. The guy golfed a home run into the trees until 300 feet. He's like, don't worry about that, Schoolie. We'll get him next time. You know. Yeah. And then conversely, Eldon Ocker, Schoolie needed. That's what he needed, was like somebody just go, it's okay, Schoolie, it'll be fine. But for Eldon Ocker, he'd tell me, like, Eldon Ocker would strike somebody out, and he'd be like, "What are you doing? That last pitch was 2 inches too high. You got lucky on that." He rode him incessantly because he knew that Eldon Ocker pitched well when he was mad, when he was trying to prove something. You see what I'm saying? So there was like different psychologies for each pitcher, and that's just one of the many things that Mickey brought to the table.
And so that was just the turning point, and then the Tigers went. And they did what he said. They won the World Series.
Yeah, but it's not as There's much more.
Yeah, and we're gonna get into that.
Yeah, but the idea was the overall concept is that coming out of spring training, like all he would preach to them was this: is that we are going to win.
Yeah,
we are going to win. That's all he said. That was his entire mantra. We are going to win. He taught them all these different plays to run. So like when a guy was on second, they would do this and these different strategies and stuff.
So he was more than just a catcher. He was
the manager. Oh, absolutely. He ran everything.
Okay.
Yeah, he ran everything. And so he taught them all these plays. And then their first spring training game against the Yankees, he told these players, he said, "I don't want you talking to any of these guys. Don't talk to any of them." He said, "We're here to beat the crap out of these guys and then get out of town and beat the crap out of the next people.
Right.
We're not here to make any friends. We don't like these guys. We screw these guys." That's what his mentality was. He was a winner in every sense of the word, and so that was his whole thing. So it was even Billy Rogel, who the shortstop for the Tigers, who even said, if I can quote him off the top of my head, but he says he believed and he believed in us, and he said he believed that we were going to win. And he made us believe that we were going to win also. And he said, and when we came out of, this is Billy Rogel, he says, when we came out of spring training in 1934, we played like we believed, and he said, and we won, and we began to win, and right from the get-go, they were winning. And so they came right out of spring training playing like world beaters in 1934. Yeah. And so all of a sudden, when they're coming out and they're winning games and they're at the top of the league, they're battling with the Yankees, beating the Yankees, they're at the top of the league, and all these guys. And one of the great things was, this is another little element we can add to the sports landscape of Detroit, was Hank Greenberg in 1934. Yeah. The great Hank Greenberg. Nobody knew who Hank Greenberg was before 1934.
I still don't know who Hank Greenberg is.
Hank Greenberg was their first baseman. He's a Hall of Famer.
Fair play. Okay.
Hall of Famers, names on the wall. The two really, of all the sports stars in the 1930s, really the handful that have come down to us. There's really 5 major stars that people remember. Joe Louis, of course. And then you have, for the Tigers, the only 2 players that really emerged. Even Mickey Cochran has been forgotten.
Yeah.
Even Mickey Cochran, like his name is on the Tiger wall, but it's only, I believe it's an honored member. It's not like his number's retired or anything.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, that's one of the cases I want to make eventually, is why his number should be retired. But anyways, for the Tigers, the 2 big names were Charlie Gehringer, who was their second baseman, who was the best second baseman in baseball at the time. You could make a case. Tony Lazzeri was close. I mean, Tony Lazzeri was an incredible second baseman for the Yankees, but you think you would have to give the edge to Charlie Gehringer for his second base, and then Hank Greenberg at first those are the 2 guys that modern day fans would that would definitely know. For the Lions, you have Dutch Clark, and for the Red Wings, you have virtually none that anybody remembers, and that is one of the great shames.
Yeah.
None of their jerseys are retired in the rafters of the arena. But some of the greatest names were from this time.
So, all right. So the Tigers, the energy's there. It's moving up.
Yep.
They go on to win, and we'll spend a couple episodes on that season. But you mentioned the Lions. We don't have the Lions. The Lions don't exist.
Yeah.
So how do they go from not existing? How do we get the Lions?
Exactly. So the idea is that the Detroit Tigers come out of the gate in 1934, and the Detroit fandom is just awakened. I mean, when the Tigers are winning, Mickey Cochran's like, "We're gonna win. We're going to the World Series. We're going to the World Series." Like, he's made believers not only out of the team but out of the city.
Nice.
And so the city is just rocking for Detroit. I mean, like every once in a while, like when the Tigers are down for a while, and all of a sudden they win. It's like you've seen it for yourself.
Yeah.
Detroit goes Tiger Mania, and that's what happened in 1934. It was Detroit Tiger Mania. So in the midst of this, at the end of 1933, as far as the NFL is concerned, there's a city called Portsmouth, Ohio, and there was a team called the Portsmouth Spartans, who were one of the best NFL teams. They were incredibly good. They were really good. They're really the three best teams in the NFL at that time were the Packers, the Bears, and the Spartans. Those were the three best teams. You could throw the Giants in there a little bit, the New York Giants. You could throw them in the mix a little bit. But those were the three teams that were really battling for the number one every single year. And so anyways, at the end of the problem for the Portsmouth Spartans was as good as they were, the Great Depression had just ravaged this town, and so they couldn't support the team anymore.
Yeah.
And the team was like the players were all owed money. Had been given stocks and bonds in the team for half a year at that point already. So the team was dismantled. The team was broken up. But then with the Detroit coming alive with sports enthusiasm, a whole new idea shifts, and so the idea. So George Richards, who was the owner of the WJR radio in Detroit, he comes up with the idea of, I believe it was his idea, but he becomes the principal owner of the Lions. So the idea is they move the Portsmouth Spartans to Detroit, but they couldn't call them the Spartans,
right?
Because the idea was they wanted to associate this team with the Tigers. That was the goal because they wanted to take advantage of the sports enthusiasm in Detroit. Right. And so if you want to associate with the Tigers, keep with the jungle theme of the city. I don't know, maybe a name like the Lions, maybe that would work. So that was the idea, was to further that marketing cause. The best player on the Spartans, who actually hadn't played the previous year with them because he was not getting paid. He was one of the great superstars in the NFL at the time, Dutch Clark. And Dutch Clark, they ended up marketing him as the Ty Cobb of football, right? From a marketing strategy, you're bringing in this new NFL team, this full of great players, because that was the goal. Is like you have this great team. If they can come over to Detroit and not just be a team, but win like the Tigers are winning, to take advantage, to try to draw the enthusiasm there, from one season to the next. And so now you got Dutch Clark, the Ty Cobb of football. There's a new Ty Cobb in Detroit because Ty Cobb had retired. Ty Cobb was long gone. He left the Tigers in 1926, and he retired in 1928, just a couple years after that. But now all of a sudden, there's a new Ty Cobb in Detroit. But he doesn't play baseball. He plays football. You got to come over to University of Detroit Stadium to watch the new Ty, to watch the new Ty Cobb. So that was the idea, was that the Lions came in Detroit as to take advantage of this newfound sports enthusiasm. And the Lions were tremendous in their first year, 1934. Their first 7 games, they didn't have to give up a single point.
Wow.
They won their first 10 games, and then they faded at the end of the year. So they just missed out on the NFL championship in 1934, just like the Tigers missed out at the end of 1935 when the Tigers went to 7 games and lost in one of those heartbreaking fashions. I met this lady at an art show who is, I forgot how old she was, at least in her like 90s, and they were saying, and she was saying like she remembered it. She said she remembered when the Tigers lost that 7th game, and she says she still has not gotten over it. Even when they went to win the World Series in 1935, she said it broke their hearts so bad in 1934 to lose that the 34 one.
Yeah.
That it was like she said, it was just heartbreaking, because they'd gone so far. Mickey would be like, we're going to win, we're going to win, we're going to win. They go all the way to the 34 World Series, 7 games. They were actually leading at one point in the series. And then they lose in the 7th game horribly. They had like a bunch of errors and the game just fell apart. They got blown out. They're like, it was just it ripped their hearts out, man. So, anyways, it was on that. That was the whole thing. The Red Wings in 34, 35 were not good. They did not do. They were
sure.
And so the stage was set for 1935 because the off season of 35, they asked Mickey Cochran. Now the spring training is jammed with reporters. All these people. They asked Mickey Cochran, "Hey Mickey, how you think you're going to do in 35?" It was a joke because they all knew his response was, "We're going to win the World Series this year, right? This time we're going to win it." And so, that was the idea, was that, so 1935 was one of the most anticipated baseball seasons in Detroit in the history of the city. Like, there was I've got articles, at the end of the second book, I've got articles that are literally, it's a whole section in the appendix that's just about Detroit sports fans in 1935, just to show like the kind of mania there was. I mean, there was literally caravans of buses going down to Florida for spring training. Everybody was there. All Detroit, like other sports stars, other celebrities, Detroit celebrities, everybody was going down there. It was the biggest thing to go down to spring training. And, like I say, because it was just the most anticipated season that there was. And so the Red Wings were not, unaware of this. And they're like, and they knew that this was an opportunity. If they themselves could tie into this excitement, then they could be part of this joy too.
Maybe get some people cheering for them in their stadium.
Go. Exactly. So this might be their moment to turn the ship around for their organization. And so the right off the bat in that off season of 34-35, the owner goes out and. James Norris goes out. And he recognized they need this thing. And so over the course of before the Red Wings would eventually win the Stanley Cup, they would turn over off the time. I think it was 13 players off their roster. They needed all new guys. They needed a whole thing. And so the very first thing that they did.
Did you hear that, Stevie? Freshen it up.
Yeah.
All right.
So Norris, one of the first things they do, almost like akin to the Detroit Tigers, they went out and spent $50,000 to bring in two young stars, Sid Howe and Scotty Bowman, which those two names sort of bring resonance or familiar, but neither one are related to anybody that, like, Sid was not related to Gordie Howe. And Scotty was not related to them out at Scott. But the thing is about it was for $50,000, the Red Wings had just done what the Tigers had done by the flashy move of getting Mickey Cochran. Now they're like, we're in the game. We're just $50,000 on these two guys. We're ready to win too, And so the stage was set for this incredible season.
And then it's 1935, 33 different championships.
It's just dominoes.
The big three: baseball, football, and hockey.
Yep.
Out of the three, you consider yourself a hockey guy, a football guy, or a baseball guy?
I would have to, I would have to say baseball. Yeah. I would have to say baseball.
It seems when we talk, you
I have
talk
a whole
lot
other
about
thing. Yeah, I have a whole other project besides this, which is baseball analytics.
You're passionate
like
about baseball
too type thing. Yeah, so it's
the 33,
baseball's my thing. Yeah.
33 championships. Because today you talk about major sports, and it's there's a fourth in there, basketball, and there's we haven't really mentioned any basketball. Why no basketball?
Pro basketball really wasn't, is from what I understand. I mean, really the pro basketball was, if it even existed anywhere, it was in its extreme infancy. I'm talking about in the cradle. It was basketball existed, but it was a much different game, much different. It was a little bit more of a physical sport. It was much more. It wasn't like it is where you see now, anywhere near what it is now.
Sure. So there wasn't a championship really to be had at that point.
Exactly. But I actually say in the book, if the Detroit Pistons were around in 1935, I'm pretty sure that they would have won their championship too.
Just had to.
They would have won it. Yeah. I'm pretty sure they would have got it.
Detroit City of Champions. We're going to dive into these players and these people and these teams and the seasons coming up on future episodes. Let's run down some of the other people. We mentioned Garwood.
Garwood was a big one.
Motorsports on the water.
Mm-hmm. Speedboat racing. World record for speed on water, and the Harmsworth Trophy, which was the most coveted trophy in the world at that time.
All right. And then you said the Red Wings, but then also there was like a junior Red Wings.
Exactly.
There was
Yeah, no, it was called the Detroit Olympics.
Okay.
And so at that time, it's rare that a minor league team plays in the same city, or especially given they're the same stadium as the major league club. But the Detroit Olympics were Jack Adams, the GM and coach of the Red Wings. He wanted to keep a close eye. He wanted to develop this team in his own image. He wanted these players, so that's why he kept them at Olympia. And also, to keep the registers, turning when they were on the road, they could still draw revenue for the building. But yeah, that's one of the great stories in the thing, because the Red Wings. When the Red Wings win their first championship, they won it in Toronto, and so that they celebrated, into the night, of course. But they got on that train and they made it back. They made it back to Detroit with all haste, because the very next day, the Olympics, the Detroit Red Wings minor league team, the Olympics, win their first, not their first, but they won their championship as well.
Wow.
The very next day. So there was not just one professional championship in Detroit in the season. There was two.
Oh my God!
See what I'm saying? Like, they're literally the major and minor league team, one within a day of each other. I mean, it's like literally every sport.
Joe Louis had some amazing bouts, and on his rise, I see a tennis player up there.
Yep, there's actually two: Constance O'Donovan and Esther Pulitzer.
All right, and then Pulitzer.
Yep, Pulitzer.
Pulitzer,
women's doubles tennis champion.
I see some track folks.
Yep, yeah,
some track and field guys.
Bill Bonthran's over there. Yeah, we have Eddie Tolan. So Bill Bonthran was a little bit more of a distance runner.
Okay,
and then Eddie Tolan was a sprinter. He won the 1935 sprint championship in Australia,
okay.
Professional sprint, and he won 2 gold medals at the 1932 Olympics too. Very famous. Like, people that dive a little bit deeper into Detroit sports history, like some of that stuff. Eddie Tolan's a big name.
Right.
Like, he's a big name for people that dive a little.
We'll do an episode on him and some of these guys.
So many great stories. There's so many great.
Is there like a shooting and is there archery?
Everything, yeah. We got Henry B. Joy Jr. for skeet shooting champion. And some of the guys are not listed was the Detroit pistol shooting. There was a national police pistol shooting championship.
Okay.
Detroit police swept it. Like, they had the best individual winners. They had the team winners. I mean, I have the whole thing in it. Like, you wouldn't believe it. They're like, and they actually said, like, the writers were like, isn't it a nice consolation for us to know that our Detroit police are like the marksmen of pistols. So
maybe we'll get some Detroit cops in here to talk with us when we do that one.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories with the Detroit police. Like, they used to have all kinds of different events, like Detroit like fundraising events and stuff that I'm not even sure how much they do them anymore. But they used to be all civic pride type events.
We talked to Joe Louis. We'll talk about Joe Louis. We'll do at least a show based on Joe Louis.
So many you could talk about.
When we do, we'll have Joe Louis Barrow Jr. the third with us.
Yeah.
We'll get JoJo in here.
Yeah.
We were working with the folks with Joe Louis Bourbon on our other podcast. So we'll get. We've been talking to JoJo with the bourbon stuff. So we'll get JoJo in here when we talk about Joe Louis.
Yeah. A couple other championships really top. They're kind of quirky or interesting, whatever. You have, of course, the 1935 World Checkers champion is from Detroit, Newell Banks, one of the greatest, checkers and chess players of all time. But made money by playing blindfold and beating people blindfolded. And then you have the Stroh's bowling champion. Stroh's bowling team was the ABC bowling champions, the first beer sponsored bowling team to win. To win a championship, to set that, they created, they were the ones that laid the foundation for beer companies to sponsor bowling clubs. And it was that Stroh's bowling team. I can't wait to talk about them, because it's Corey's we got his bowling team championship. But that team was one of the greatest bowling teams ever assembled. in Detroit in the 1950s and 60s, the Detroit became synonymous with bowling.
Bowling for dollars.
And Stroh's bowling team was the thing to be on. You wanted to get on that Stroh's bowling team so you could be make your way through the Detroit scene or whatever, professional bowling circuit. Yeah.
Heading down to the Palladium lanes and Hamtramck.
There's a lot to it. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. To answer the one question you had is this was the birth of the Detroit sports concept. The Stroh's bowling team gave rise to the the golden age of bowling in Detroit and all this other stuff. So
Detroit City of Champions. It's a trilogy of books. Charles Avison. Again, this was it.
Champions.com, yeah.
When I talked to you at that art fair, I'm like, holy crap, this cat is dynamic.
Yeah.
The story is amazing.
Yeah.
And then Matt and I launched these podcast studios here, Podcast Detroit in Northville, and it's we gotta. people need to tell stories. I go, I know a guy who needs to tell a story.
I got some stories to
and
tell.
I called you up and you said, yeah, let's tell these stories. So I'm so glad you're letting me along for the ride, because if I say anything stupid, everybody please forgive me, because I don't know anything about sports, but I just enjoy the history. I love the way you tell a story. I love how excited you get about it, and I'm excited about diving into the rest of these stories. All right, so Detroit City of Champions, it's a website, DetroitCityOfChampions.com.
Yep.
And that's the easiest, best place to try to find the books.
Yeah, you can.
Because if the power goes out, and because with the world the way it is here in 2020, we're going for a total shutdown very soon. So you want hard copies of this to be able to read.
Don't trust the internet for that's what I'm saying. Like,
entertain yourself.
Yeah, we don't want.
But all the primary sources you went to, and you pulled from all these primary sources, so you have all these in these books, and it's just rich with pictures that are just have been. If you didn't recover these things, they'd be lost. There's this incredible plaque that we'll do a whole episode on the memorable plaque that was lost. And just buried, and how it made its way back into the museum.
It really is an incredible story. I wrote a screenplay for a movie. I actually got it sitting right back here. You can kind of see it tucked back here.
Yeah.
So we got a movie ready to go to do like a Netflix miniseries and everything. But there's a component that I actually want to sort of add to it, if we redo a rewrite or a little bit more to the screenplay, which is literally just following the story of this plaque that was commemorated, that was carved just for this story.
Yeah.
I mean, it was signed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It was signed by every governor in the country recognizing Detroit as a city of champions. And it had this incredible journey. It vanished. I mean, nobody even knew it was like it was almost like Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, where it was basically uncovered in a box in the basement of the Detroit Historical Museum.
Right.
And like, what is
but how it
thing?
got there, and don't spoil it.
I'm not going to.
We're going to get
the
there.
Journey of how it got there.
I know
is just incredible. So
I know.
I think there's some really great stories. I'm just glad to be on here. I'm glad to have a different format, because again, like a lot of the times I tell the story, it's usually in like little 2 to 4 minute sound bites at art shows, and libraries. I do some talks and this and that, but I always start at the beginning of the story for every time. Every time it's always from the beginning of the story, which is fine. Right. I love telling the story, but I'm looking forward to diving deeper into it.
Yeah,
bringing the audience along. Anybody that's like a repeat viewer, because there's so much to explore. It's just such. I mean, it's so much important stuff to explore, not just like random little things.
And the city needs it. The city, we need it. And just we need it. We need good vibes. So. But people will listen, because they're going to stop right now and they're going to go and subscribe.
Yeah. Nice.
If you would do us that favor, do us that kind honor of subscribing, it helps. And then leave a comment if you could. We truly, genuinely appreciate it. Detroit City of Champions. There's a Facebook page. Me, DJJamieDetroit.com is all my crazy business. You can follow on all the socials. Follow us there and see what's going on. So DetroitCityOfChampions.com for you. And that's it. Detroit City of Champions. There's one in the books.
That's number one. Yeah, great.
All right. Thanks, Charles.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. That was fun.